The huge space station floated around the neutral moon called Sanctuary Prime, where leaders from all over the galaxy came together for an emergency war meeting. The Draknari Empire had been pushing deeper into human space for many months, and their latest win at Kepler Station had everyone talking. Captain Lee Hanna from the Earth Defense Force sat quietly in the corner of the meeting room. Her old, weathered hands were folded as alien delegates talked about human fighting abilities with barely hidden disgust. Commander Vextar of the Draknari fleet stood in the center of the room. His forearms moved dramatically as he told stories about their recent battles, his lizard-like face twisted into what humans had learned was their version of a smile. The translator collar around his thick neck made crackling sounds as he spoke in perfect standard galactic language. The humans sent their so-called elite infantry to defend Kepler Station. Vextar announced loudly, so his voice carried across. The whole chamber, 12,000 of their best soldiers, armed with their old-fashioned bullet weapons and explosive devices. We expected at least some fight from these creatures who claim to be warriors. The other delegates leaned forward with interest. The bug-like Zephyrians clicked their jaws in what was laughter for their species. Even the usually neutral, crystalline Confederacy representatives seemed amused. Their see-through bodies shimmered with colors that meant they found it entertaining. Vextar continued his story, describing how his forces had swept through the human defensive positions like a storm through grass. He spoke about human soldiers running away in terror about their weapons being useless against Draknari, armor about how easy it was for his troops to capture the important mining facility. The audience loved every word. Many nodded their heads or made sounds that meant approval in their species. Captain Hanna stayed perfectly still during the whole presentation. Her dark eyes never left the Draknari commander. She had been at Kepler Station. She had seen what really happened there, and it was nothing like the story being told to this gathering of galactic powers. As Vextar reached the exciting part of his story, painting the human defenders as cowards who ran away at the first sign of real fighting, something interesting happened. The captain's aide, a young lieutenant named Kim J., whispered something urgently in her ear. For just a moment, Hanna's calm expression cracked, and several delegates caught a glimpse of something that made them move uncomfortably in their seats. The human military, Vextar declared with dramatic contempt, is nothing more than an organized mob of scared civilians, playing at being soldiers. Their infantry units fall apart the moment they face real warriors. It is almost sad how overrated Earth's military reputation has become in certain circles. The chamber erupted in various forms of alien laughter and agreement. The Draknari had been the strongest military power in this sector for over 200 years, and their opinion carried significant weight. Several species that had been thinking about defensive agreements with humanity began reconsidering their options. That was when Captain Lee Hanna finally spoke up. "Excuse me, Commander," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. The chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to the small human woman who had been ignored for most of the meeting. "I was wondering if I could ask you a question about your story of the Kepler Station fight, Vextars." 4 eyes focused on her with hunting interest. "Of course, Captain, though I am curious what a human infantry officer could possibly question about. A battle she was not present for." The slight smile that played across Hanna's lips was barely visible. But somehow every delegate in the chamber noticed it. "Oh, but I was present, Commander. I was the commanding officer of the 7th Human Rapid Response Unit. We were among those 12,000 soldiers you mentioned." The silence that followed was so complete that the hum of the station's life support system seemed deafeningly loud. Vextar's confident posture shifted slightly, though he kept his air of superiority. "Then you witnessed your own species, humiliation firsthand," he replied. "How unfortunate for you." Captain Hanna stood up slowly, her movements precise and controlled. Every eye in the chamber followed her as she walked closer to the center. of the room. When she spoke again, her voice carried a quality that made several delegates check their personal shields. Before I respond to that, Commander Vexstar, I have just one simple question for you. She paused, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. When you give your kill count from the Kepler engagement, do you want my unit's numbers? Or should I just give you mine alone? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Every delegate in the chamber suddenly felt that something very important was about to happen. The way Captain Hana stood, the tone of her voice, the confidence in her movements all suggested that the story they had just heard was not the complete truth. The Draknari commander, who had seemed so sure of himself moments before, now looked uncertain. Commander Vexstar opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He stared at the small human woman who had just challenged everything he had said. The other delegates waited in tense silence. Some of them began to realize that they might have been hearing only one side of what had happened at Kepler Station. The Zephyrian delegates stopped clicking their jaws. The Crystalline Confederacy representatives changed to colors that showed worry. Even the usually calm stone wanderers seemed nervous, their rocky features making grinding sounds. Captain Hana waited patiently for an answer. Her dark eyes never left Vexstar's face. She seemed completely at ease despite being surrounded by representatives of species that could easily overpower a single human. The confidence she showed was not the kind that came from weapons or technology. It was the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were talking about. Lieutenant Kim Jae stood near their original seats, still recording everything with a small camera device. He seemed just as calm as his captain, which only added to the growing tension in the room. Whatever these two humans knew, it was clear that they had come to this meeting prepared. The massive space station continued its orbit around Sanctuary Prime, but inside the meeting chamber, time seemed to have stopped. Everyone was waiting for someone to break the silence. The story of Kepler Station, that had seemed so clear just minutes before, was suddenly full of questions. What really happened at that mining facility? What were these humans not telling the galaxy? And why did a simple infantry captain seem so confident when facing down one of the most feared military commanders in known space? The delegates from dozens of different worlds all had the same thought at the same time. They were about to learn something that would change how they thought about human military capabilities forever. The question was whether they were ready for what Captain Lee Hana was about to tell them. Commander Vexstar finally found his voice, though it was much quieter than before. I do not understand your question. Human, are you perhaps confused from the trauma of your defeat? But even as he said the words, he seemed to know they were wrong. The human captain was not acting like someone who had been defeated. She was acting like someone who had won a victory so complete that her enemies did not even realize what had happened to them. Captain Hana smiled again, and this time, every delegate in the chamber felt a chill run down their spine, or whatever passed for a spine in their particular anatomy. The real story of Kepler Station was about to begin. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Commander Vexstar's lizard features shifted through several expressions before settling on confused anger. Around the chamber, delegates who had been laughing moments before now sat in uncomfortable quiet, sensing that something big was about to unfold. I do not understand your question. Human Vexstar finally responded, though his voice carried less certainty than before. Are you perhaps still confused from the trauma of your defeat? Captain Hana reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a small data pad. The device looked ordinary, just standard military equipment, but the way she held it suggested it contained something important. Lieutenant Kim Jae, still standing near their original seats, was recording everything with a small camera device. Let me help clarify things, Hana said, turning on the data pad. The Draknari Empire filed an official battle report with the Galactic Military Registry following the Kepler Station engagement. According to your own documents, you deployed 15,000 ground troops supported by 12 heavy assault ships and 47 fighter craft. She looked up from the device meeting Vextar's four-eyed gaze directly. Your report also claims total victory with minimal Draknari casualties. Specifically, you listed 43 wounded and 12 killed in action. Is this accurate? Vextar's chest swelled with pride. Precisely accurate. Our warriors are highly trained and well-equipped. Your human infantry never had a chance against us. Interesting, Hana replied, her tone staying perfectly neutral, because the actual casualty reports from Kepler Station tell a very different story. She touched the data pad again, and suddenly the chamber's main display screen flickered to life. What appeared was not the neat, clean battle report that Vextar had described, but raw footage from helmet cameras and security systems. The images were grainy and chaotic, showing the interior corridors and defensive positions of Kepler Station. The first clips showed exactly what Vextar had described. Draknari forces advancing through human defensive lines, their superior technology and armor allowing them to push forward against desperate resistance, human soldiers, could be seen falling back, their positions being overrun by the lizard warriors' relentless advance. But then something changed in the footage. This is where your official report becomes interesting. Commander Hana continued, her voice cutting through the shocked murmur that had begun among the delegates. Your forces did initially push us back from the outer defensive perimeter. Your technology is impressive, and your soldiers are well trained, but you made one critical error in your planning. The screen now showed deeper sections of the station areas that looked different from the outer defenses. The corridors were narrower here, with more obstacles and defensive positions. The lighting was dimmer, creating shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. You assumed that falling back meant we were retreating in defeat, Hana explained. What you did not realize was that we were drawing you into the stations, interior sections areas we had been preparing for weeks before your arrival. The footage shifted to show Draknari forces advancing confidently through these inner corridors, their formation tight and professional. They moved like the elite military unit. They were checking corners and maintaining proper spacing. Everything appeared to be going according to their plan. Then the first explosion lit up the screen. It was not a large blast, just a small charge that brought down part of a corridor ceiling. But the timing was perfect, separating the Draknari forces into two groups and blocking their primary advance route. Immediately, the professional formation began to show signs of confusion. The thing about human infantry commander Hana continued as more explosions appeared on the screen, is that we have been fighting each other. For thousands of years, we have learned some very specific lessons about warfare that apparently the Draknari have not encountered before. The footage now showed human soldiers appearing from positions that seemed impossible. They emerged from ventilation shafts, hidden panels in the walls, and concealed bunkers that had been invisible moments before. Their weapons fire was precise and coordinated, targeting specific points on the Draknari armor that intelligence had identified as weak spots. What followed was not the chaotic route that Vextar had described, but something much more systematic and terrifying. The human soldiers moved through the station's corridors like they owned them, which they did. Every door, every junction, every possible hiding spot had been prepared in advance. The Draknari found themselves fighting not just an army but the station itself. Commander Vextar's confident expression was beginning to crack as he watched his own forces being systematically dismantled by an enemy he had dismissed as inferior. Around the chamber, other delegates were leaning forward in their seats, suddenly very interested in what they were seeing. But this is impossible. Vextar protested, his voice higher than before. Our casualties were minimal. Our forces achieved total victory. Captain Hana touched her datapad again, and the display changed to show neat rows of numbers. These are the actual casualty figures from Kepler Station compiled from medical evacuation records, missing persons reports, and forensic analysis of the battlefield. The numbers on the screen were not at all what Vextar had reported. The delegates began murmuring among themselves as they saw the real figures, Draknari dead in the thousands, wounded requiring immediate evacuation in the thousands, more missing and presumed dead in the thousands. The Zephyrian delegates were no longer clicking their jaws in amusement. The crystalline Confederacy representatives had shifted to colors that showed deep concern. Even the usually calm Stone Wanderers were showing signs of worry, their rocky features grinding together nervously. "These numbers come from your own medical facilities," Lieutenant Kim Jae said, stepping forward. "We intercepted the emergency medical requests that your fleet transmitted during and after the battle. Your own doctors were requesting immediate evacuation for thousands of casualties." The screen changed again, this time showing intercepted communications between Draknari medical ships. The messages were in the Draknari language, but subtitles in Standard Galactic appeared below each transmission. "Emergency medical transport required for critical casualties." One message read, "Estimate 4,000 immediate surgeries needed." Another message, time-stamped just 6 hours later, was even more desperate. "Medical supplies exhausted, requesting emergency resupply of blood substitutes and surgical equipment. Casualty count exceeding all projections." Captain Hana walked closer to Commander Vextar, her presence somehow more intimidating despite her smaller size. The interesting thing about modern warfare, Commander, is that it is almost impossible to hide the real numbers: medical supplies, ammunition expenditure, fuel consumption, communication, traffic, even the psychological evaluation reports for your surviving troops. Everything leaves a trail. She activated another section of her data pad, and the screen filled with more intercepted communications. These were even more damaging than the medical requests. They showed Draknari field commanders requesting immediate reinforcements, reporting unit cohesion breakdowns, and in some cases requesting permission to withdraw from their assigned positions. This particular message, Hana said, highlighting. "One transmission came from your ground forces commander at Kepler Station, Colonel Zaktor. I believe his name was." She paused to read the translation. "Human defensive capabilities severely underestimated. Request immediate tactical reassessment. Enemy forces demonstrating advanced knowledge of asymmetric warfare techniques. Conventional assault strategies ineffective." The chamber was dead silent now. Every delegate was staring at the evidence being presented. The story they had heard from Commander Vextar was falling apart before their eyes, replaced by something much more complex and frightening. Commander Vextar tried one more time to salvage the situation. "Even if your numbers are accurate, which I dispute, the fact remains that Draknari forces took control of Kepler Station. We achieved our strategic objective." Captain Hana nodded slowly. "You are absolutely right about that, Commander. You did take control of Kepler Station." Her slight smile returned, and somehow it was even more unsettling. "Then before, the question is, what exactly did you capture?" The display screen now showed 2 columns of numbers side by side. On the left, the official Draknari battle report that Commander Vextar had filed with the Galactic Military Registry. On the right, a detailed breakdown of actual casualties based on multiple independent sources. The difference was shocking. According to your official report, Captain Hana said, highlighting the left column, Draknari forces suffered 12 killed and 43 wounded during the Kepler Station engagement. However, independent medical evacuation records show a very different picture. She pointed to the right column where the numbers told a completely different story. The delegates in the chamber began murmuring among themselves as they processed what they were seeing confirmed. Draknari dead, 4,712. Hana read aloud, wounded requiring immediate medical evacuation, 6,238. Missing in action presumed dead, 3,891. The silence that followed was deafening. Commander Vextar's lizard features had gone pale, his four arms trembling slightly as he stared at the numbers on the screen. Around the chamber, delegates from various species were frantically checking, their own data devices trying to verify what they were seeing. "This is fabricated," Vextar managed to say, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence, human propaganda designed to salvage their reputation after a humiliating defeat. Lieutenant Kim Jay stepped forward at this point, carrying a larger data device. "Commander, these numbers come from your own medical facilities," he said in accented but clear Standard Galactic. "We intercepted the emergency medical requests that your fleet transmitted during and after the battle. Your own doctors were requesting immediate evacuation for thousands of casualties." The screen changed again, this time showing intercepted communications between Draknari medical ships. The messages were in the Draknari language, but subtitles in Standard Galactic appeared below each transmission. "Emergency medical transport required for critical casualties." One message read, "Estimate 4,000 immediate surgeries needed." Another message, time-stamped just 6 hours. Later was even more desperate: medical supplies exhausted, requesting emergency resupply of blood substitutes and surgical equipment, casualty count exceeding all projections. Captain Hana walked closer to Commander Vextar, her presence somehow more intimidating, despite her smaller size. "The interesting thing about modern warfare, Commander, is that it is almost impossible to hide the real numbers. Medical supplies, ammunition expenditure, fuel consumption, communication traffic, even the psychological, evaluation reports for your surviving troops. Everything leaves a trail." She activated another section of her data pad, and the screen filled with more intercepted communications. These were even more damaging than the medical requests they showed. Draknari field commanders requesting immediate reinforcements, reporting unit cohesion breakdowns, and in some cases, requesting permission to withdraw from their assigned positions. This particular message, Hana said, highlighting one transmission, came from your ground forces commander at Kepler Station, Colonel Zaktor, I believe his name was. She paused to read the translation. "Human defensive capabilities severely underestimated. Request immediate tactical reassessment. Enemy forces demonstrating advanced knowledge of asymmetric warfare techniques. Conventional assault strategies ineffective." The Zephyrian delegates were no longer clicking their jaws in amusement. The crystalline Confederacy representatives had shifted to colors that showed deep concern. Even the usually calm stone wanderers were showing signs of worry, their rocky features grinding together in what passed for nervous fidgeting among their species. Commander Vextar tried one more time to salvage the situation. "Even if your numbers are accurate, which I dispute, the fact remains that Draknari forces took control of Kepler Station. We achieved our strategic objective." Captain Hana nodded slowly. "You are absolutely right about that, Commander. You did take control of Kepler Station." Her slight smile returned, and somehow it was even more unsettling than before. "The question is, what exactly did you capture?" The screen changed once more, this time showing orbital surveillance footage of Kepler Station taken several days after the battle. The massive mining facility hung in space, looking intact from the outside. But as the camera zoomed in, details became visible that told a different story. Kepler Station was indeed a valuable strategic target. Hana continued. It processed rare earth minerals essential for advanced weapon systems and faster-than-light drive components. The facility could produce enough refined materials to supply an entire fleet for months. She paused, letting the implications sink in. "However, there is something important you should understand about human military doctrine. Commander, we do not just fight to win battles, we fight to win wars." The orbital footage now showed the interior of Kepler Station through blown-out sections of the hull. What was visible inside was not a functioning mining facility, but twisted wreckage and empty corridors. Every piece of valuable equipment had been either destroyed or removed before your forces arrived at Kepler, Captain Hanna explained. We spent 3 weeks systematically evacuating everything of value. Every piece of mining equipment, every computer core, every gram of processed materials, even the specialized staff who knew how to operate the facility. By the time your assault began, Kepler Station was nothing more than an empty shell with some very unpleasant surprises hidden inside. The realization of what she was saying began to dawn on the assembled delegates. The Draknari had suffered massive casualties capturing a facility that was essentially worthless, but there was clearly more to the story. The human doctrine Hanna continued is based on thousands of years of warfare against opponents who were technologically equal or superior to ourselves. We learned long ago that sometimes the best way to win is to make your enemy's victory as costly as possible. She looked directly at Commander Vexstar. So when you ask about kill counts from the Kepler engagement commander, I want to make sure I give you accurate numbers. Because the battle did not end when your forces took the station, the chamber was now filled with tension so thick it could almost be felt physically. Every delegate was hanging on Captain Hanna's words, waiting to hear what else had happened. The story of Kepler Station was clearly much more complex than anyone had imagined. What do you mean? The battle did not end. Vexstar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Captain Hanna activated her datapad once more, and new footage appeared on the screen. This time, it showed the space around Kepler Station several hours after the Draknari had declared victory. What the delegates saw made several of them gasp in surprise. The Draknari fleet that had supported the ground assault was still in the system. Their ships were damaged from the fighting, and many were clearly struggling with the massive casualty load from the ground engagement. Medical evacuation shuttles were moving constantly between ships trying to save the wounded. But there was something else in the footage. Something that the Draknari commanders had not noticed at the time, hidden among the debris field from the battle, concealed by the wreckage of destroyed ships and the interference from damaged communication systems, were sensor contacts that should not have been there. You see, Commander Hanna said, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone. The thing about human military planning is that we always prepare for multiple contingencies. We knew that after taking Kepler, your fleet would either withdraw immediately or remain in system to consolidate your gains. We were ready for either possibility. The sensor contacts in the footage suddenly resolved into clear images, and what they showed made every delegate in the chamber sit back in shock. Human warships, dozens of them, had been hiding in the system the entire time, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. The second human expeditionary fleet, Captain Hanna announced, consisting of 38 capital ships, 115 destroyers, and approximately 400 fighter craft. Under the command of Admiral Park Minji, one of our most experienced fleet commanders, Commander Vexstar's 4 eyes went wide with disbelief. This is impossible. Our sensors would have detected such a large fleet. Not if they did not want to be detected, Captain Hanna replied. Human stealth technology has some interesting capabilities that apparently your intelligence services are not aware of. The implications were staggering. The humans had not just prepared defensive positions at Kepler Station, they had positioned an entire fleet in the system ready to engage any Draknari forces that remained after the battle. The trap had been far more elaborate than anyone could have imagined. The orbital surveillance footage on the main screen continued to play, showing the aftermath of the Kepler Station engagement from multiple angles, but Captain Hanna was not finished with her presentation. She touched her datapad again, and the timestamp on the footage jumped forward by several hours. This is where the story gets interesting, she said, her voice carrying an edge that made several delegates unconsciously lean back in their seats. You see, Commander Vexstar taking Kepler Station was never really your objective. It was ours. The confusion in the chamber was obvious. Representatives from a dozen different species looked at each other uncertainly, trying to understand what they were hearing. How could a human defeat be considered a human? Objective Lieutenant Kim J stepped forward with additional data displays, setting up multiple screens around the chamber's perimeter. Each screen showed different aspects of the Kepler engagement that had not been visible in the main footage communication. Intercepts, ship movement patterns, supply convoy routes, even psychological profiles of key Draknari commanders. For 6 months before your attack, Captain Hana continued, human intelligence had been feeding information to Draknari military planners. We made sure you knew exactly how valuable Kepler Station was. We made sure you understood our defensive capabilities there. We even made sure you knew the optimal timing for an assault. She pointed to one of the peripheral screens, which showed a timeline of intelligence leaks and strategic information that had somehow found its way into Draknari hands. The pattern was too consistent to be accidental. Every piece of information your planners used to design the Kepler assault came from sources that we controlled, she explained. We wanted you to attack that station, Commander. We needed you to commit significant forces to taking it. Commander Vextar's 4 eyes widened as the implications began to sink in. That is impossible. Our intelligence. Networks are secure. Our sources are verified through multiple channels. Your sources were accurate. Hana agreed. Kepler Station really was valuable. Our defensive positions really were as strong as your intelligence indicated. Your assault plan really would have worked against a conventional human defensive force. She paused for effect. The only thing your intelligence failed to mention was that we had no intention of fighting a conventional defense. The main screen now showed a wider orbital view of the Kepler system, revealing details that had not been visible in the earlier footage. What became apparent was that Kepler Station was not an isolated target, but part of a much larger strategic picture, while your 15,000 troops were fighting their way through our prepared defenses at Kepler. Captain Hana continued human rapid response units were conducting simultaneous operations at 17 different Draknari facilities across this sector. New footage appeared on the screens around the chamber showing human forces in action at various locations. These operations looked nothing like the defensive battle at Kepler Station. Instead, they showed small, highly mobile human units conducting precision strikes against Draknari installations, supply depots, and communication centers. The thing about asymmetric warfare, Hana explained, is that it is not about winning individual battles. It is about making your enemy's victories so costly that they cannot afford to keep winning. The numbers on the displays were staggering. While the Draknari had been committing massive resources to taking one mining station, human forces had systematically dismantled their logistical infrastructure across an entire sector. Supply. Convoys destroyed communication networks, disrupted forward operating bases, eliminated even key personnel targeted for capture or elimination. But this is just the beginning. Captain Hana said, her tone becoming almost conversational. The really interesting part comes next. The screen showed the Draknari fleet that had supported the Kepler Station assault. 12 heavy assault ships and 47 fighters, just as Vextar had boasted earlier. But the footage now revealed something that had not been apparent in the initial battle reports. Your fleet commanders made an interesting decision after taking Kepler, Hana observed. Instead of immediately returning to base for resupply and medical treatment, they chose to maintain position in the system. For 3 additional days, I am curious about that choice. Commander Vextar's expression had gone from confident to concerned to something approaching panic standard procedure. We needed to secure the area and establish defensive positions, actually. Lieutenant Kim J interjected. Intercepted communications suggest a different reason. Your fleet commanders were concerned about human reinforcements. They wanted to maintain a strong presence in case we attempted to retake the station, Captain. Hana nodded approvingly at her aide's contribution, which brings us to the second part of the Kepler operation. Because while your fleet was sitting in system, dealing with massive casualties and trying to figure out how to make use of an empty mining station, we were implementing the rest of our plan, The display changed to show long-range sensor readings from the Kepler system taken during the 3 days following the initial battle. What they revealed was a gradual buildup of sensor contacts around the system's perimeter, moving in patterns that suggested careful coordination. The thing about human military doctrine, Hana continued, is that we plan for multiple contingencies. We assumed that after taking Kepler, your fleet would either withdraw immediately or maintain position to prevent recapture. We were prepared for either scenario. The sensor readings now showed the moment when the human reinforcements revealed themselves. What had appeared to be random sensor noise suddenly resolved into a massive human fleet emerging from stealth positions throughout the system. The second human expeditionary fleet, Captain Hana, announced consisting of 38 capital ships, 115 destroyers, and approximately 400 fighter craft. Under the command of Admiral Park Minji, one of our most experienced fleet commanders. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Every delegate was staring at the displays, trying to process what they were seeing. The human fleet that had appeared at Kepler was more than twice the size of the Draknari force that had taken the station. Admiral Park had been positioned in the system for over a week before your assault began. Hana continued, waiting in complete communications. Silence. For the right moment to reveal our presence, Commander Vextar's voice was barely above a whisper. This is impossible. Our sensors would have detected such a large fleet, not if they did not want to be detected. Captain Hana replied, human stealth technology has some interesting capabilities that apparently your intelligence services are not aware of. She gestured to Lieutenant Kim Jae, who activated another set of displays. These showed detailed technical specifications for human military equipment, information that was clearly classified at the highest levels. The question now, Commander Captain Hana said, her voice carrying a finality that suggested they were approaching the climax of her presentation, is what you think happened when Admiral Park's fleet revealed itself to your damaged and depleted forces. The delegates waited in tense silence. The story of Kepler Station had taken so many unexpected turns that nobody could predict what would come next. The small human captain had systematically destroyed every assumption about the engagement, revealing layer after layer of planning and preparation that painted the conflict in a completely different light. What had seemed like a simple Draknari victory over inferior human forces was revealing itself to be something much more complex, a carefully orchestrated trap that had drawn the Draknari into exactly the position the humans wanted them in. The question hanging in the air was what price the Draknari had paid for walking into that trap. The main display screen flickered, and suddenly the chamber was filled with the chaos of space combat. The footage was taken from multiple sources. Human ship cameras intercepted Draknari transmissions and long-range sensor arrays. What it showed was not the one-sided engagement that anyone might have expected, but something far more complex and devastating. The engagement began at 13:47 hours system time. Captain Hana narrated as the footage played. Admiral Park's fleet had been monitoring Draknari communications for 3 days, listening to damage reports, medical requests, and most importantly, tactical discussions among your commanders. The screen showed the moment when the human fleet decloaked their ships, appearing seemingly from nowhere around the Draknari forces that had been occupying Kepler Station. But instead of immediately opening fire, there was a strange pause in the action. Admiral Park's first action was not to attack, Hana continued. Instead, she opened communications. With the Draknari fleet commander, I think you will find the conversation interesting. Audio began playing through the chambers, speakers translated into Standard Galactic. The voice of Admiral Park Minji was calm and professional, with just a hint of steel underneath. Draknari Fleet Commander, this is Admiral Park of the 2nd Human Expeditionary Fleet. Your forces are significantly outnumbered and many of your ships are damaged. I am authorized to offer terms for your withdrawal from this system. The response came from what was presumably the Draknari Fleet Commander, his voice strained with stress and exhaustion. Human fleet. This is Commander Kethvar of the Draknari 3rd Assault Fleet. We have taken this system according to the laws of war. We will not be intimidated by threats. There was another pause during which the displays showed the tactical situation from multiple angles. The Draknari fleet was indeed heavily damaged from their ground engagement, with several ships showing obvious signs of battle damage and reduced capability. They were also completely surrounded by human forces that significantly outgunned them. Commander Kethvar. Admiral Park's voice continued. I want to be very clear about something. This is not a threat. This is a professional courtesy. Your ground forces have fought bravely, and your fleet has conducted itself with honor. I am offering you the opportunity to withdraw with your wounded and return to Draknari space. And if we refuse, came the reply. The pause that followed was longer this time, and when Admiral Park spoke again, her tone had changed subtly. Then you will join the 14,841 Draknari personnel who are already listed as casualties from this engagement. Lieutenant Kim Jae stepped forward at this point, highlighting specific numbers on one of the peripheral displays. It is important to understand that Admiral Park was not making an empty threat. He explained to the assembled delegates. Human forces had been conducting continuous operations throughout this sector for weeks. The casualties Captain Hana mentioned earlier were just from Kepler Station itself. The display now showed a comprehensive breakdown of Draknari losses across the entire sector during what the Draknari High Command had classified as a minor border skirmish. The numbers were staggering. Total Draknari military personnel listed as casualties during the Kepler sector operations, Kim Jae read from the display. 23,476 dead, 31,812 wounded, 12,933 missing in action. Commander Vexstar, who had been growing paler throughout the presentation, finally found his voice. Those numbers are impossible. If casualties were that high, the Draknari High Command would have declared a full military alert. The entire sector would have been reinforced. Captain Hana turned to face him directly, and her expression was not unkind, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. Commander, the Draknari High Command did declare a full military alert. They did send reinforcements to this sector. In fact, they sent their 3rd, 7th, and 12th fleets to investigate what they classified as a human insurgent activity in the border regions. She gestured to Lieutenant Kim Jae, who brought up another set of displays showing fleet movement patterns and battle reports from across a much wider area of space. What your High Command discovered, Hana continued, was that human insurgent activity consisted of coordinated operations by 17 different human fleet groups supported by over 400 specialized infantry units, all operating under a unified command structure that had been planning this campaign for over 2 years. The scope of what she was describing began to dawn on the assembled delegates. This had not been a single battle or even a local conflict. It had been a carefully orchestrated military campaign involving hundreds of thousands of personnel and spanning dozens of star systems. The Kepler engagement, Captain Hana explained, was never about Kepler Station. It was about drawing significant Draknari forces into a predetermined kill zone where we could engage them under conditions of our choosing. The audio from the space battle resumed playing, picking up where Admiral Park's ultimatum had left off. I need time to consult with my superiors, came Commander Kethvar's response. You have 15 minutes, Admiral Park replied. After that, I will interpret any delay as a rejection of terms, and I will act accordingly. The footage showed what happened during those 15 minutes. Draknari ships frantically attempted to establish communications with their high command, but their transmissions were being jammed by human electronic warfare systems. Medical evacuation shuttles continued moving between ships, trying to deal with casualties from the ground engagement. Most tellingly, Several Draknari vessels began moving into defensive formations, clearly preparing for battle. Commander Kethvar made his choice. Captain Hana said quietly. It was not the choice Admiral Park had hoped for. What followed was unlike any space battle the delegates had ever seen footage of. Instead of the typical exchange of energy weapons and missile barrages, the human fleet employed tactics that seemed almost surgical in their precision. Human military doctrine, Hana explained as, the battle played out on screen emphasizes the importance of minimizing unnecessary casualties while achieving strategic objectives. We had no interest in slaughtering brave soldiers who were following orders. We wanted to disable their ability to fight while giving them every opportunity to surrender. The footage showed human ships targeting specific systems on Draknari vessels, weapons arrays, engines, communication systems, life support. Instead of trying to destroy the enemy ships outright, they were systematically crippling them. But the most devastating aspect of the engagement was not the weapons being used, but the coordination of the human forces. Every ship moved with perfect precision. Every attack was timed to maximize effectiveness, while minimizing collateral damage, and every tactical decision seemed to anticipate Draknari responses before they happened. The engagement lasted 47 minutes, Captain Hana concluded, as the footage showed the final Draknari ships surrendering. When it was over, the surviving Draknari personnel were treated according to the Galactic Convention on military prisoners, given full medical care, and eventually repatriated to Draknari space. She turned back to Commander Vexstar, whose earlier confidence had completely evaporated. So when you ask about kill counts, Commander, I want to make sure I give you the complete picture. Because the real question is not how many casualties resulted from individual engagements, but what those engagements were designed to accomplish. The chamber was dead silent. Every delegate was staring at the evidence before them. The story of human military incompetence that they had believed was being replaced by something far more frightening, a demonstration of strategic planning and tactical sophistication that challenged every assumption about human capabilities. The silence in the chamber stretched for long moments as the assembled delegates processed everything they had witnessed. The footage from the space battle had ended, but the implications of what Captain Hana had presented were still sinking in. This had not been a simple border skirmish or even a conventional military engagement. It had been something far more sophisticated and terrifying. Captain Hana walked slowly around the chamber, her presence commanding attention, despite her relatively small stature compared to many of the alien representatives. When she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of someone who had seen warfare at its most brutal and most precise. The interesting thing about military reputation, she began, is that it is often based on incomplete information. Species throughout the galaxy look at human history and see our tendency toward internal conflict, our relatively recent entry into galactic politics, our preference for kinetic weapons over energy systems, and they draw certain conclusions. She paused near the Zephyrian delegation, whose compound eyes were tracking her movement with obvious unease. What they fail to understand is that those characteristics are not weaknesses. They are the result of 10,000 years of continuous warfare against opponents who were our equals in intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking. Humans did not learn to fight against primitive enemies or inferior technologies. We learned to fight against ourselves. Lieutenant Kim Jae activated a new display showing a timeline of human military conflicts throughout history. The sheer scope of it was overwhelming. Thousands of wars, millions of battles, billions of casualties, all spanning from the earliest recorded conflicts to the modern interstellar age. Every tactical innovation, every strategic doctrine, every piece of military technology that humanity has developed came from fighting opponents who knew all of our previous tactics and strategies. We were forced to constantly evolve, constantly adapt, constantly find new ways to gain advantages over enemies who understood us completely. Commander Vexstar, who had remained silent throughout the final presentation, finally spoke up. His voice was hoarse, barely above A whisper. "What do you want?" he asked. "What is the purpose of this demonstration?" Captain Hana stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "I want to make sure that everyone in this chamber understands what really happened at Kepler Station and, more importantly, what it means for future relations between humanity and the Draknari Empire." She gestured to the displays that still showed casualty figures and battle footage. "Your empire made a strategic decision to test human military capabilities. By attacking our border installations, that was a reasonable choice based on the information available to your planners. However, the assumptions underlying that decision were fundamentally flawed. The main screen now showed a star map of the entire sector with human and Draknari territories clearly marked. What became apparent was that the recent conflicts had resulted in significant changes to the territorial boundaries. The Kepler sector operations, Captain Hana continued, resulted in the withdrawal of Draknari forces from 43 star systems, the establishment of human control over 17 major strategic installations, and the effective neutralization of 3 Draknari fleet groups as combat-effective forces. She let those numbers sink in before continuing. More importantly, they demonstrated something that I think needs to be clearly understood by all galactic powers. Human military doctrine is not based on individual heroics, superior technology, or overwhelming force. It is based on systematic preparation, adaptive tactics, and the willingness to accept short-term losses in order to achieve long-term strategic objectives. The delegates were beginning to understand the broader implications of what they were hearing. The humans had not simply won a military engagement, they had demonstrated a level of strategic planning and tactical sophistication that challenged basic assumptions about their capabilities. The question that each of your governments needs to consider, Hana said, addressing the chamber as a whole, is how this information affects your own strategic calculations, because the engagement at Kepler was not an isolated incident. It was a demonstration. Lieutenant Kim Jae brought up one final set of displays showing human military assets throughout the galaxy. The scope of what was revealed was staggering. Human forces were present in far more systems than anyone had realized, often in roles that had seemed purely defensive or commercial. For the past 5 years, Captain Hana explained, human military planners have been conducting a comprehensive assessment of potential threats throughout our sphere of influence. We have identified 17 different scenarios that could result in significant conflicts with various galactic powers. She paused to let that sink in. For each of those scenarios, we have developed detailed operational plans, positioned appropriate assets, and conducted extensive training exercises. The Kepler operations were based on contingency plans that had been in development for over 3 years. The implications were clear. If humanity had spent 3 years preparing for a conflict with the Draknari Empire, they had likely spent similar time preparing for potential conflicts. With every other major power in the galaxy, Commander, Vexstar was staring at the displays with something approaching shock. You planned all of this. Everything that happened you planned in advance. Not everything, Captain Hana corrected. We planned for multiple contingencies and prepared assets accordingly. What actually happened at Kepler was just one of several possible scenarios we were ready for. The key is that we were ready. She walked back to the center of the chamber where she had started, her presentation hours earlier. The point I want to make to this assembly is simple. Human military capabilities have been systematically underestimated by galactic powers for decades. This underestimation has led to strategic miscalculations that have resulted in unnecessary casualties and territorial conflicts. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes or optical sensors of representatives from dozens of different species. Humanity does not seek conflict with any galactic power. We prefer diplomatic solutions to territorial disputes and economic cooperation to military competition. However, we have learned from our own history that the best way to preserve peace is to be prepared for war. The final display showed current deployments. of human military assets across known space. The network was vast and sophisticated, covering strategic choke points, trade routes, and resource-rich systems throughout the galaxy. These forces are not positioned for aggressive action, Captain Hana explained. They are positioned to respond to threats against human interests and to support our allies when requested, but they are also positioned to demonstrate that attacking human territories or allies will result in consequences that far exceed any possible gains. She deactivated her datapad and the displays went dark. The choice facing each of your governments is whether to continue basing your strategic planning on outdated assumptions about human capabilities or to acknowledge the reality of what you have seen here today. Commander Vexstar stood slowly, his 4 arms trem.